The wind howled through the empty streets of Portland, Maine. A storm was rolling in, its icy fingers already creeping across the river. Snow mixed with sleet, making the city feel like it had been swallowed whole. The quiet was eerie, unnatural, and in the midst of it all, a small, fragile figure huddled by the riverbank. A little girl, no more than 6, with messy blonde hair plastered to her pale cheeks. She sat alone on the cracked concrete near an old, rusting dock, her knees pulled to her chest. The tattered pink backpack she clutched to her chest was her only protection from the cold. Her small, thin frame trembled violently, but it wasn't from the cold, it was from something far worse. The girl's wide grey eyes flicked nervously over her shoulder, her face pale, lips trembling. There was something in the way she looked at the world, something that said she had seen too much for someone so young. Something dark, something terrifying. A faint sob broke the silence, barely audible against the howling wind. The girl's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, each one echoing the fragile thread of fear that ran through her. And then there was a sound, not from the girl, not from the wind. A sharp, warning bark, deep, powerful. A dog's growl, low and steady, like a warning from the shadows. The man who stepped forward was no stranger to pain. Ethan Hayes, a man carved by grief and loss, walked into the frame like a ghost made real. His heavy boots crunched the frozen ground beneath him, his breath visible in the air, mingling with the girl's. His once dark beard was now streaked with grey, his face etched with lines that spoke of battles both fought and lost. By his side, Shadow, his loyal German shepherd, stood silent, watchful, alert. The dog's amber eyes scanned the street, checking for threats before focusing on the girl huddled near the water. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the leash, but he didn't pull it taut. He let Shadow approach on his own terms. "Hey there," Ethan called softly, his voice low and calm, as if he had said this 100 times before. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. She didn't look up. She was frozen in place, as if the world around her was too much to bear. Shadow stepped forward, nose twitching. He circled the girl, his body low to the ground, as if assessing the danger. The girl flinched, but Shadow didn't lunge. Instead, he sat down beside her, his gaze softening as if offering her a silent promise. Ethan crouched down slowly, not wanting to startle her, his eyes scanning her fragile frame for signs of injury. She flinched when he moved closer, but he didn't force her. He waited. "I'm Ethan," he said quietly. "This is Shadow. We're here to help." The girl didn't speak at first. Her eyes, wide and haunted, flickered up to meet his for a brief moment before darting away. She said nothing. She only clutched her backpack tighter, as though it were the only thing between her and the world that had abandoned her. And then, finally, a whisper. "Please, don't take me back." The words were barely audible, lost in the wind, but Ethan heard them. And in that moment, something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried years ago, shifted. He rose to his feet slowly, offering the girl his hand, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he promised. "You're safe with us." Shadow, sensing the fragile trust being formed, moved closer and nuzzled the girl's knee, offering her a moment of comfort in the midst of the chaos. She hesitated, then reached out, her tiny fingers brushing against the dog's fur. "Let's get you out of here," Ethan said softly, his tone gentle but resolute. The girl's lips trembled, but she nodded. She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. Ethan took her hand, guiding her to her feet as Shadow trotted ahead, leading the way, toward the truck parked just up the street. As they walked toward the truck, the storm howled behind them, but something else lingered in the air, a promise, a bond being formed against the odds. The girl, who had been abandoned by the river, was now in the hands of someone who wouldn't let her go. Ethan Hayes wasn't going to let her fall through the cracks again. He glanced down at the little girl beside him, her face pale but determined. She was still too afraid to speak, but he could see it in her eyes. She had been running for too long, but now she was no longer alone. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hayes allowed himself to believe in something better. The storm hissed against the truck, sleet whispering on glass, but Ethan's focus tunneled to the dark seam of tree line where Shadow's hackles lifted. The German shepherd's growl was low, steady, the kind that vibrated in the ribs and said, "Predator, close." Ethan didn't reach for the door handle, not yet. He let the silence grow heavy, let the snow disguise his measured breath. "Maya," he said gently, eyes never leaving the mirror. "Stay under the blanket," Shadow's here with you." The girl pressed the yellow scarf to her chest and curled tighter against the dog's warmth. Shadow angled his body over hers, eyes fixed forward, tail rigid. Ethan's mind ran the calculus he hadn't wanted to run for years: distance, cover, line of approach. PTSD never let you forget, only offered nightmares in place of drills. He could almost feel the grip of a rifle he no longer carried, the weight of choices he swore he'd retired from. A branch cracked, deliberate, close. Ethan's hand found the flashlight in the console, thumb sliding over the worn switch. He flicked it once. The beam cut a harsh cone into the tree line, bounced off wet bark, found nothing human. But the prints he'd seen earlier, triangular heel gouges, were fresh. He knew what kind of man left a child by a winter river. That kind of man didn't vanish when headlights found him. He waited, he planned. He spoke for Maya's ears, not the shadow outside. "We're leaving now." He shifted into drive. Tires crunched over the frozen gravel, headlights washing pale gold over skeletal birches. For a beat, Ethan caught the reflection of eyes in the underbrush, too high for an animal, too still, then gone. Maya's whisper brushed the cabin, thin and raw. "He's watching." Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. Not anymore. But he knew it was a lie, at least for now. The road wound along the river, a thin artery barely plowed. Shadow lay half across Maya's lap, anchoring her as the truck jolted over ruts. Each mile stretched Ethan between two worlds, the here and now with a child whose silence screamed, and the old battlefield replaying behind his eyes, where every innocent you saved carried the weight of the ones you couldn't. He stole glances at her in the mirror. Her lips were colorless, her grey eyes wide and unfocused, but when her small hand burrowed deeper into Shadow's fur, she stopped shivering. "Good girl," Ethan murmured, not sure which of them he meant. By the time he turned into his drive, the storm had swallowed the town whole. His modest house hunched beneath the weight of snow, lightless except for the faint glow of a lamp he'd left burning. The world was muffled, the storm a curtain drawn tight. He parked, cut the engine, and listened. Nothing but the pop of cooling metal and the faint whine of the wind. Shadow leapt down first, circling once, tail stiff, then gave the low huff that meant all clear for now. Inside, warmth crept slow from the wood stove. Ethan hung his jacket, then crouched to peel off Maya's soaked sneakers. Her socks clung wetly, toes mottled blue. He wrapped them in a towel, then slid wool socks over her feet, small, borrowed from his daughter's old drawer he hadn't been able to empty. He caught himself pausing, hand lingering. Emily's ghost hovered in the room, her laughter layered over Maya's shallow breaths. "Tea?" he asked, voice sandpaper. "Or cocoa?" Maya's eyes flicked up at the word. She nodded once. Shadow padded to the hearthrug, settling like an anchor. Maya sank down beside him, clutching the scarf, until her head rested against his flank. She exhaled with a sound that was half a sob, half a surrender, a fragment of the past. In the kitchen, Ethan filled the dented kettle. His reflection in the window startled him, gaunt, grey-streaked beard, steel eyes hollowed by years of nights like this, 5 winters since Claire's car had spun off an icy road. 2 months since Emily's small hand had gone slack in his at the hospital. He had thought his life a long corridor of loss. Now, here was a door cracked open. The kettle shrieked. He poured cocoa, rich and dark, the way Emily had loved, carried it to the living room. "Careful. Hot," he said, kneeling as he passed the mug. Maya wrapped both hands around it, knuckles white, as if afraid it might vanish. She blew softly, then sipped. A faint flush touched her cheeks. For a minute, silence was gentler. Then she spoke, voice gravel-scratchy, almost too soft to catch. "Please, don't send me back." The mug trembled in her grip. Shadow pressed closer, chin on her knee, amber eyes fixed on Ethan. And in that instant, Ethan knew 2 things. Whoever Uncle was, he wasn't done. And whatever battles lay ahead, he and Shadow had already chosen a side. The wood stove ticked as it cooled, filling the silence with tiny pings. Outside, the storm eased into a steady curtain of snow, laying a white hush across Birch Lane. Inside, Ethan Hayes sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, watching the girl who had just asked him not to send her back. Maya clutched the yellow scarf so tightly it looked like she might wring it to threads. Her cocoa sat untouched now, steam, curling faint and thin. Shadow stayed pressed to her side, the solid weight of a guardian, amber eyes flicking between her and Ethan, as if monitoring the fragile thread of trust stretching across the room. Ethan knew this was the moment when silence could either calcify into fear or break just enough to let truth seep through. He chose his words carefully, softly, like laying planks across a river of ice. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," he said. "But if there's something you want me to hear, I'll listen. No lights, no uniforms, just me and Shadow." Her lips parted, closed, parted again. Finally, a breath-shaped words, no louder than the stove's hiss. "He locks me in the basement." The sentence sat between them, heavy, undeniable. Ethan's jaw flexed, knuckles whitening against his knees. He forced his body still, knowing anger aimed wrong could shatter her fragile courage. "He says, I'm broken," Maya whispered. Her eyes glossed, gaze fixed on the scarf, as though it could shield her from memory. Shadow nosed her hand gently, a silent correction. "You are not broken." Ethan swallowed hard, voice steady only because years of discipline had taught him how to sound calm in the middle of chaos. "Who says that, Maya? Your uncle?" She nodded once, jerky, as if each movement cost her. Then she added, almost inaudible, "He gets money for me because I'm sick." The words tangled, half nonsensical, but Ethan's instincts told him there was truth in them. Truth warped by manipulation. He remembered the bruises, the raw marks, the way she'd whispered, "I'm not safe here." His gut said this man wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. Ethan rose, moving into the kitchen with deliberate steps. His hands shook as he reached for the phone on the counter. For a moment, he stared at it, seeing his daughter's tiny hand gripping his during chemo nights, her wide eyes asking silently if he could make the pain stop. He had failed Emily, she had slipped away despite every fight he put up. But Maya? He wouldn't fail her. He dialed a number he hadn't called in months. "Grace Morgan," came the voice on the other end, warm but edged with exhaustion. She was a child protection caseworker he'd once met on a community call, a woman who carried the scars of seeing too much, but still showed up every morning. "Grace, it's Ethan Hayes." A pause. Then, "Ethan? It's late. What's wrong?" "I found a girl. 6, maybe. Out by the river. Bruises, terrified, doesn't want to go home." His throat worked. "She says her uncle locks her away, says she's broken. Grace, she's not safe." The silence on the line was sharp, professional gears shifting. Then Grace's voice came firmer. "Is she with you now?" "Yes. Keep her warm. Don't press. I'll be there first thing in the morning." "Grace," Ethan began. Her tone softened. "You did right calling me. Just hold on until I get there." Back in the living room, Ethan knelt on the rug beside Shadow and Maya. "Grace is coming tomorrow," he said. "She helps kids. She'll help you." Maya's face tightened, mistrust flickering like a shadow. "She'll take me back." "No," Ethan said firmly, gentler than any promise he'd spoken in years. "Not if it's not safe. I'll make sure of it." Her eyes searched his, desperate and disbelieving. Shadow shifted, laying his head squarely on her lap, grounding her to this moment, this warmth. Slowly, Maya's shoulders eased. She sipped her cocoa again, a tiny motion, but to Ethan it was a victory. Later, Ethan laid a blanket on the couch and set a second by the fire. Maya curled into the corner, Shadow pressed along her side like a fortress. Ethan lowered himself into the recliner across the room, boots still on, heart unwilling to rest. The storm moaned against the windows. In the flicker of firelight, Ethan let his gaze drift to the mantel where a photograph still sat. Claire, laughing, her dark hair caught in the wind. Emily, gap-toothed, hugging Shadow when he was still a pup. The ache rose sharp, but tonight it carried something else, a spark of purpose. In the half-dark, Maya stirred, a broken sound escaping her throat. "Don't lock me in, please." Ethan was out of the chair in 2 steps, kneeling beside her. He didn't touch, just let his voice fill the nightmare's space. "You're safe. He's not here. Shadow and I, we've got you." Shadow rumbled deep, resting heavier against Maya. Her small hand found his fur, gripping. Her breathing slowed. Ethan sat there long after, watching the snow pile against the glass, every nerve on alert, waiting for the dawn and Grace's arrival. Because he knew this night was only the beginning, and whatever Uncle had started, he would not let it finish. Morning came slow, grey light seeping through the snow-caked windows. Ethan Hayes hadn't slept. He sat in the recliner, boots still on, eyes burning from keeping vigil while Shadow dozed in a half-alert crouch at Maya's side. Every creak of the house had set Ethan's pulse racing, but nothing breached the storm's silence. At 8:10, tires crunched on the street outside. Ethan rose, muscles stiff, hand resting briefly on Shadow's back before opening the door. Grace Morgan climbed the steps, snow dusting her wool coat. Hazel eyes, sharp but kind, she carried a leather satchel hugged close to her chest. Behind her, the grey Subaru idled in the street. "Ethan," she said softly, brushing sleet from her hair. "Where is she?" He stepped aside. Grace entered the warm, dim living room. Her gaze softened when she saw Maya curled on the couch, scarf clutched, shadow protectively draped across her lap. Grace crouched low, voice gentled by years of practice. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's Grace. I help kids make sure they're safe." Maya stiffened, eyes wide. Her grip on the scarf whitened. Shadow lifted his head, gauging the stranger, then lowered it again with a faint sigh, as if granting permission. That seemed to ease Maya just enough to nod faintly. Grace glanced up at Ethan, then motioned toward the kitchen. He followed, leaving Shadow as Maya's guard. Grace pulled a thin notebook from her satchel, her breath fogging faintly in the still chilled air. "Tell me what happened." Ethan recounted everything, finding Maya by the river, the bruises, the whisper about the basement, the mention of money for an illness that didn't exist. Grace's pen moved in quick strokes. "She's not exaggerating," Ethan finished, steel in his voice. "You can see it in her eyes. She's been through hell." Grace's jaw tightened. "I believe you, but if her guardian, this uncle, contests, it's going to get ugly. He has rights on paper. We'll need evidence, medical records, photographs, financials, if what she said is true." Ethan's hands curled into fists on the table. "Evidence or not, I won't let her go back." Grace studied him, saw the truth in his eyes. "Then we fight." By mid-morning, Grace had called in 2 CPS investigators. Detective Carl Bennett arrived first, a solid man in his 50s, with eyes like forged steel. He surveyed the room, then Maya, his expression softening briefly before resuming professional neutrality. "We'll need photos," he said, voice clipped but not unkind. Mia Torres, a younger caseworker, knelt by Maya, holding up a small tablet. "Sweetheart, I need to take some pictures of your arms and legs. Just to help you, Shadow can stay right here." Maya hesitated, then touched Shadow's ear as if to ask. The dog gave a slow blink, a canine reassurance. Reluctantly, Maya let Mia lift the scarf away. The images showed everything Ethan already knew: purple bruises patterned along ribs, wrists scored by rope-like marks, skin too pale for health. Carl exhaled sharply. "This isn't neglect. This is abuse." Ethan's jaw tightened. Shadow's ears flattened against his skull. Grace scribbled more notes, her lips pressed into a thin line. The landline rang, the sound sliced the air like a blade. Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides, hand hovering before he picked up. "Mr. Hayes," came a voice sharp, cold, unmistakably male. "You have my daughter." Ethan's grip tightened. "Mark Dawson? You've got no right to keep her," Mark spat. "I'll report you for kidnapping." The line went dead before Ethan could answer. Ethan stared at the receiver, knuckles white. Behind him, Grace's face had gone pale. She had heard. "He's moving fast," she said grimly. "If he files a motion, we'll have hours, days, at most, to keep her safe." Maya had curled against Shadow, eyes wide, every muscle tight, as though she had heard the voice too, even through the wall. She whispered into Shadow's fur, almost inaudible. "Don't let him take me." Ethan crouched, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of oath and battlefield vow. "He won't," he promised. "Not while I'm breathing, not while Shadow's watching." And as Shadow's tail thumped once against the rug, Ethan knew the real war had begun. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that clung to history and judgment. Snow clung to Ethan's boots as he climbed the steps, Shadow pacing tight at his side, sensing the tension vibrating through his handler's frame. Grace Morgan walked just ahead, her satchel heavy with documents, her wool coat still dusted from the storm outside. Inside, the hallway buzzed with muted voices. A radiator hissed against the cold. Ethan felt out of place here. He was a man of fields and fences now, not marble floors and oak benches, but today wasn't about him. Today was about Maya. Before the judge at the front of the courtroom, Judge Rebecca Moore took her seat, robes flowing as she settled behind the bench. Her sharp brown eyes scanned the room, weighing truths before anyone spoke them. At the petitioner's table sat Mark Dawson, pressed navy suit, failing to disguise the red flush of anger crawling up his neck. Beside him, attorney Daniel Price adjusted his glasses, his silver hair neatly combed, his pale eyes scanning the opposition with the sharpness of a scalpel. Ethan felt Shadow press against his leg, a silent reminder. Steady. Grace gave Ethan a small nod. Be calm, for her. And beside Grace, Sarah Coleman, the attorney Ethan had barely met 2 days earlier, radiated quiet confidence. Her auburn bob framed a face honed by battles like this one. You ready? She asked Ethan under her breath. He adjusted his cuff, jaw set. Doesn't matter. Maya doesn't have anyone else. Sarah's lips curved in the faintest grim smile. Good answer. Mark's argument. Daniel Price rose first. His voice was silk over steel. Your Honor, my client, Mark Dawson, has endured a terrible violation. After the tragic passing of Lily Carter's mother, he stepped in, providing food, shelter, and stability. Yet Mr. Hayes, Daniel's hand gestured toward Ethan, almost dismissively, took it upon himself to abduct the child. These bruises and marks? Exaggerations at best, self-inflicted at worst. Lily has a history of seeking attention. Gasps rippled through the benches. Ethan's fists curled, but Sarah pressed her hand lightly against his forearm, grounding him. Shadow growled low, a rumble that turned heads before Ethan hushed him. The defense. Sarah Coleman rose with deliberate calm, adjusting her blazer as if putting on armor. What we have here, she began, her voice clear and sharp, is not a custody dispute. What we have is abuse. We have photographic evidence, CPS reports, medical observations, and eyewitness testimony. Lily Carter's injuries are consistent with repeated trauma, neglect, and restraint. To return her to Mr. Dawson's custody would not only be irresponsible, it would endanger her life. Daniel scoffed audibly. Judge Moore's eyes cut to him like knives. Counselor, professionalism. Grace on the stand. Grace took the witness stand next. Her hazel eyes met the judge's with steady fire. Lily is malnourished, bruised, and emotionally withdrawn. Her fear is not staged. It is lived. In my 12 years with Child Protective Services, I know the difference. She is terrified of returning to Mr. Dawson's care. Her words landed like weights on the table. Daniel shifted, scribbling something furiously. Mark glared, his knuckles whitening on the table edge. Maya speaks. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked slowly to the stand, scarf wound tight around her neck, pink backpack clutched like armor. Her gray eyes avoided Mark completely, settling instead on Shadow, who had been allowed to stay near the witness stand. The shepherd lay still, amber gaze soft but unyielding. Sarah crouched to Maya's level. Sweetheart, do you feel safe with Mr. Dawson? Maya shook her head, lips pressed tight. Can you tell the court why? Silence stretched. The storm rattled against the courthouse windows, as though urging her forward. Finally, her whisper broke the air. He locks me in the basement. He says, I'm broken. Gasps rippled again. Judge Moore's expression softened for just a heartbeat before sharpening once more. Mark shot to his feet, red-faced. She's lying. Sit down, Mr. Dawson, Judge Moore commanded sharply. One more outburst, and you'll be removed. Maya's small hand slid onto Shadow's back, gripping his fur. Shadow didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed her shield in fur and muscle. The verdict. Sarah stood. Your Honor, we request Lily remain under Mr. Hayes's temporary guardianship, while CPS conducts a full investigation. Returning her now would put her in imminent danger. Judge Moore studied the photos, the reports, the trembling child before her. After a long pause, she spoke. This court grants temporary guardianship of Lily Carter to Mr. Ethan Hayes for 90 days, effective immediately. CPS will monitor weekly. A follow-up hearing will be scheduled. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief and resolve warring in his chest. Beside him, Grace closed her notebook with quiet satisfaction. Maya leaned into Shadow, whispering into his fur. Safe. But when Ethan glanced toward Mark, he saw something colder than rage in the man's eyes. Something that promised, this isn't over. Snowmelt dripped from the courthouse eaves as Ethan Hayes guided Maya down the steps, Shadow pacing at her side. For the first time in days, sunlight cut through the clouds, glinting off icy sidewalks. But Ethan's chest stayed tight. The look Mark Dawson had thrown him in the courtroom wasn't just anger, it was a promise. A fragile morning. Back home, Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, pink backpack propped against her knee. She sketched on scrap paper with colored pencils Ethan had bought, each stroke hesitant but steadying. Shadow sprawled beside her, tail thumping whenever her hand brushed his coat. For the first time, a sound escaped her lips that wasn't a whisper or sob, a small giggle when Shadow's wet nose nudged her arm. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the fragile piece. Something in his chest eased, but it was fragile too, like ice too thin to step on. Sarah's discovery. That afternoon, Sarah Coleman called Ethan into her office downtown. Her green eyes were sharp, her auburn bob precise, her desk stacked with files. She wasted no time. "Ethan, we have something." Grace forwarded me records from the Riverside Care Foundation. It's a non-profit that provides stipends for families with terminally ill children. She slid papers across the desk. "Mark's been receiving monthly deposits for nearly 2 years. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maya's not sick. He's been submitting falsified medical forms. He's monetized her suffering." Sarah's voice dropped, heavy with disgust. "This isn't just abuse, Ethan. It's fraud. With motive." Ethan stared at the rows of figures, the forged signatures. A dull roar filled his ears. He thought of Maya's whisper. "He gets money for me, says I'm sick." She had carried this secret like a stone, and now here it was, laid bare in black ink. Michael, the forensic accountant Sarah, brought in a partner, Michael Hargrove, a forensic accountant with salt and pepper hair and round glasses. He spoke with quiet confidence as he pointed at highlighted lines. "These deposits align perfectly with grant cycles. And here, fake hospital visits, falsified prescriptions." He built an entire false narrative of illness. Ethan's fists clenched. So she was just currency to him. Michael nodded gravely. "This strengthens your custody case. It also opens a criminal investigation. Fraud, falsification of records, child endangerment. He won't walk away from this untouched." The storm before the storm. That night, back at Birch Lane, Ethan tucked Maya in with Shadow curled protectively along her side. She clutched her scarf, eyes heavy but searching. "Ethan?" she whispered. "Yeah, kiddo?" Her voice was tremulous. "If he comes, if he tries, will you stop him?" Ethan knelt, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "He won't get near you. Not while I'm here. Not while Shadow's breathing." Maya's small hand crept out, resting against Shadow's fur. The shepherd thumped his tail once, sealing the vow. Ethan stood watch at the window long after she slept. Snow fell quiet, but his gut churned. Men like Mark didn't give up when cornered. They got desperate. And desperate men were. Dangerous. A shadow at the edge. Sometime after midnight, Shadow's head jerked up. His ears pricked, body taut. Ethan followed his gaze to the window. Outside, at the edge of the streetlight's glow, a figure lingered by the tree line. Mark. Ethan's chest tightened. He reached instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. Shadow growled, low and steady, every muscle screaming threat. The figure stood one heartbeat longer, then melted back into the dark. Ethan whispered into the silence, voice a vow. "It's coming, boy. The fight's coming." Shadow's growl faded, but his eyes never left the window. The storm had become something darker overnight. The air hung heavy, oppressive, and cold, the kind of chill that settled deep into bones. Ethan Hayes sat up straight in the living room, eyes trained on the window where the shadows stretched long. Shadow, still on alert, sat by his side, his amber eyes scanning the empty street with the precision of a predator. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight of the past come roaring back, heavier than the snow that piled up against the windows. The knock at the door, it came just before dawn. A knock, sharp and commanding, echoed through the house. Ethan's body reacted before his mind caught up, muscles coiled, breath held. The dog's growl rumbled low, vibrating the floor. Maya stirred on the couch, clutching Shadow's fur tighter. Ethan's heart stuttered. It was too soon. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't prepared for how fast it would find him. "Stay here," Ethan said, voice rough. "Stay with Shadow. Don't move." The dog didn't need command. His body shifted, muscles tense, the low growl resonating like an earthquake beneath Maya's palm. Ethan reached for the door with steady hands. He didn't need to look through the peephole to know who was standing on the other side. Mark Dawson's voice, smooth and venomous, slipped through the crack. "Open up, Hayes. You've got my daughter." Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung the door open, just enough to see Mark standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 men Ethan didn't recognize. Big, rough-looking, fists like hammers, eyes full of ill intent. Ethan's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" Mark's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "You've got no right to keep her. She's mine." Ethan glanced at the figures behind Mark. They were there for one reason: intimidation. He could feel it in the air, the subtle tension before a storm. Ethan's voice was a low growl, steady with purpose. "You won't touch her." Mark's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can stop me?" Before Ethan could respond, Shadow surged forward, blocking the doorway. His growl grew louder, more pronounced, a warning. Mark took a step back, eyes widening for just a fraction of a second. The two men behind Mark looked at each other, uncertain. Ethan seized the moment. He slammed the door shut and turned, moving quickly. "Stay down," he ordered Maya, his voice firm. The hunt Ethan wasted no time. He grabbed the phone and dialed Grace's number, his mind racing. She needed to know what was happening. His heart thundered in his chest, but his focus remained sharp. The phone rang 3 times before Grace's voice came on the line, calm but with a hint of urgency. "Ethan, what's going on?" "They're here." Mark brought reinforcements. "He's not just going to let this go." Grace's breath was audible on the other end, tension threading through her words. "Get Maya out of there. I'll call the police, get a response team. We'll get her out of this." Ethan hung up, tossing his phone onto the counter. He turned back to Maya, who was still frozen on the couch, clutching Shadow as if he were the only thing keeping her anchored. "We need to move now," Ethan said. Maya's eyes locked on his, filled with a fear that cut deeper than any wound. "I don't want to go back." "I won't let you," Ethan promised, his voice low and unyielding. Shadow whined softly, his head tipping toward the back door. Ethan's instincts flared, sending a chill down his spine. He hadn't heard anything, but the dog had. He was certain of it. "Maya," he said, voice tight with urgency. "Get your coat. We're leaving." The back door creaked open as Ethan grabbed a bag with essentials. As he moved, he glanced over his shoulder, his eyes locking with Maya's. She wasn't just a frightened child anymore, she was someone who needed him. And he was ready. The chase Ethan and Maya, with Shadow leading the way, moved quickly through the back alley, dodging the empty cars parked in the snow. The storm had provided cover, but it was only temporary. The threat was closer than he realized. Mark would find them if they didn't act fast. Ethan's breath came out in rapid bursts, steam dissipating into the cold. He kept his pace steady, glancing back over his shoulder. Shadow's ears twitched, and his nose remained low, guiding them through the quiet streets like a shadow of his own. Then the silence broke. A distant engine rumbled in the snow, followed by a sharp crack of tires spinning. Mark had followed them. "We need to get to the car," Ethan muttered. He could hear the engine growing closer, the sounds of pursuit cutting through the stillness. Maya's hand tightened around his wrist, her small fingers shaking. Shadow growled again, low and deep. Ethan's body was on high alert. He scanned the road ahead, but the car was still too far behind to make an effective escape. He wasn't going to make it. The final stand. The truck rounded the corner, headlights glaring like a predator closing in. Mark's voice could be heard faintly, a growl in the storm, his words lost to the wind. Ethan and Maya had a few seconds, no more. Ethan gripped Maya's shoulders, pushing her behind Shadow. He knew what was coming. Mark wasn't going to wait for a court decision. This was personal. "Maya, stay close. Shadow, get ready." Mark's truck roared up the alley, its engine snarling through the icy streets. It skidded to a halt in front of them, and the door flung open. 2 men stepped out, each with an aura of violence about them. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Maya and the oncoming threat. Shadow stood at his side, teeth bared. "I warned you," Ethan said, his voice ice-cold. "I won't let you take her." Mark stepped from the truck, eyes burning with malice. "You think you can stop me? I'm her father." "You're a fraud," Ethan retorted, his hand clenched around the edge of his coat, ready to move. In that instant, Mark's eyes flicked to the men with him. They moved toward Ethan, but before they could close the distance, Shadow lunged. His massive form collided with the first man, sending him sprawling into the snow. Ethan rushed forward, grabbing the second man by the collar and slamming him into the truck. "Stay back," Ethan growled, his breath ragged, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Maya, shaking but not crying, whispered a single word, barely audible: "Please." With that, Shadow returned to her side, standing guard. The situation had reached its peak. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Ethan wasn't going to lose this fight, not after everything they had been through. Mark's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, but Shadow snapped, his teeth catching Mark's arm just before he could reach Maya. The struggle in the snow seemed to stretch into eternity, each moment an agonizing push against time. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, his body aching from the sudden violence, but his focus never wavered. He couldn't afford to let it. Not now, not when Maya's future was on the line. The final defeat. Mark's arms were pinned by Shadow's relentless grip. He was no match for the dog's trained strength, and as Mark flailed, his fury was quickly overtaken by the sheer force of the shepherd's bite. The two men Ethan had fought off lay motionless in the snow, stunned and out of the fight. The storm had faded into the background, leaving only the sound of ragged breaths and Shadow's growl. Ethan stood over Mark, breath coming in jagged gasps. He wasn't sure what had broken first, his body or the years of bitterness built up inside. Mark was panting, his hands raised in surrender, but his eyes burned with resentment and humiliation. "You won't win," Mark spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think she'll be safe with you? You're just a soldier, Hayes. You're not her family." Ethan stepped closer, eyes dark with unspoken rage, the pain of the past folding into the present. He wasn't a soldier anymore, and this wasn't a battlefield. This was the fight to keep a promise. "No," Ethan replied, his voice steady, cold as steel. "I'm the one who's going to keep her safe. I'm the one who's going to be here for her, whether you like it or not." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension like a lifeline. Grace Morgan had arrived, along with a team of officers. Ethan turned toward Maya, who stood just behind Shadow, her small frame trembling with both fear and relief. The arrival of justice. By the time the police took over, Mark was handcuffed and ready to be escorted to the squad car. Grace approached Ethan, her face set in a soft but resolute expression. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's over. He's going to face charges for everything he's done to her. The fraud, the abuse, it's all on record now. You don't have to worry about him anymore." Ethan glanced back at Maya. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, but the weight in her shoulders had lifted, if only slightly. Shadow stayed beside her, his body, still and alert, a silent protector. "Thank you," Ethan murmured to Grace, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Grace gave him a tired smile. "It's what we do. Just keep being there for her." Ethan nodded, but his gaze never left Maya. A quiet, safe place. As the police cars drove away, leaving only the soft crunch of tires against the snow, Ethan led Maya and Shadow back inside. The fire crackled in the living room, the only warmth in the house aside from the shared silence between them. Maya had curled up on the couch again, with Shadow resting against her feet. Ethan sat at the edge of the chair, watching them both, the weight of the past few days finally crashing into him. The pain, the fear, the anger, it all felt so much heavier now that it was over. But with that weight came something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maya looked up at him with those wide grey eyes, her face still soft from the tears she hadn't cried yet. "I'm not going back," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Ethan's chest tightened. "No, Maya," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not. You're safe here. You're home. The long road ahead. The road to healing would be long, but for the first time, Maya wasn't walking it alone. Ethan would stand beside her, as steady as Shadow at her feet. No more lies, no more fear. Just the soft, steady rhythm of a new life being built one day at a time. That evening, as the snow continued to fall outside, Maya and Shadow settled into the quiet rhythm of the house. Maya, still clutching her worn pink backpack, began to draw again, her pencil gliding across the page with a tentative smile. Shadow's head rested gently on her knee, his eyes half-lidded in contentment. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them both. For the first time in years, the empty space in his heart, the one that had been hollowed out by grief and loss, began to bid. Fill. It was small at first, a quiet flicker of something more. But it was real, and that was enough. The promise of family. Later that night, as Ethan tucked Maya into bed, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, his hand lingering longer than it should have. She met his eyes, a small spark of trust beginning to bloom in the depth of her gaze. "Good night, Maya," he whispered. "You're safe. You're home now." Maya nodded, clutching Shadow tighter as she closed her eyes, her breathing slow and even. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her. There was still so much work to be done. Maya's past would never fade completely, but now she had a chance, and so did he. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Hayes finally felt like he could breathe. With that, the story of Ethan, Maya, and Shadow concludes. In the wake of darkness and fear, they have found a new beginning together, one built on trust, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between them. The past will always be a part of their journey, but it will no longer define them. Now, they are a family. Sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with love, loyalty, and the courage to protect those who need it most. May this story remind us all that, no matter the storm, there is always a way forward together.